What's up, everybody? We are live with the Awesemo Waiver Wire Show, the Week 6 edition. I am your host, Matt Gajewski, and I am here with my partner in crime, Kyle Dvorchak. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. You can follow him at Kyle Tweets here. Our title sponsor today is Yahoo Fantasy. Today's title sponsored Yahoo Daily Fantasy, the most trusted name in fantasy sports. Yahoo DFS now includes CSV uploads and CSV edit features for those looking to play multiple lineups. Make better choices. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. Kyle, what is going on, my friend? Of course, I feel like our waiver shows these days are completely dominated by the COVID situation we have in the NFL right now. You and I were talking before the show, not always knowing exactly what the upcoming schedule is. It's making things tricky for planning out bye weeks, for planning streamers, for everything like that. And we've even had some schedule changes for the upcoming week. My first question and what I want to talk to you about, usually we start with big news, injuries, everything like that. But with COVID kind of dominating everything, how are we handling this situation with players in uncertain situations? You know, I assume there's going to be some marquee players that get COVID at some point, like Cam Newton already has gotten it. How are you handling this situation?
Yeah, for me, I'm really trying to pay close attention to what situations could go really haywire. Like if I've had Titans, I have been trying to just backload my roster with starting level guys because I am not sure. I have not been able to safely say that we will see Titans games. We didn't see a game last week. I'm quite frankly surprised we're seeing a game this week, but it looks like it's going to go ahead as planned. But I'm always trying to backfill my rosters with more prioritizing points now. Like that in the past, that was guys like Greg Ward, Olamide Zaccheaus both fit that bill. Just maybe they're not quite as high upside as some of these backup running backs. Like if somebody dropped me Cole Harden, I would have loved to have had him. But man, I can't hold these zeros if the Titans don't play, if the Patriots get their game moved, stuff like that. So I'm just trying to prioritize in rosters where I am specifically Titans heavy, but Patriots now probably fit that bill too, where I'm Titans or Patriots heavy, just getting points on the board because it seems like I may not have that opportunity. And it's also important to note that like you should have been, or you should still be now, looking to get guys from the Monday night game on your roster on the off chance this Titans game doesn't play. You give yourself as much possible time to make those swaps. Whereas say, you had a lot of Thursday night guys, you had no clue what was going on with the Titans game, with the Patriots game even. So trying to prioritize like my optionality, essentially giving myself as many outs to avoid zeros, specifically when I have a lot of guys who are COVID risk. And right now that is all Titans players. That is any of their opponents too, which you kind of have to consider too. So there's a lot of moving parts, all Titans players, all Patriots players, not so much looking to handcuff Zeke, although Zeke did get, I think, COVID in the offseason. So maybe he has those yummy antibodies, but not so much looking to handcuff Derrick Henry with Darrynton Evans, because I think he has a greater chance of missing time. Because really, I think if we see a player like, Derrick Henry or any really player get COVID, that greatly increases the chances that their game is not played. So I don't think maybe the handcuff strategy makes as much sense as the overall roster build of giving yourself outs to avoid getting zeros from moved bye weeks or canceled games.
Yeah, I don't think we should be prioritizing the handcuffs either. I think it's just such a fluid situation. Like we have no idea who will get it, who won't, and what games will be canceled or played. I think just having your pulse on the waiver wire overall, it's probably more important than any other year in football. And as we start getting into some of these injury situations, before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you know when this video and all others go live. It's the best way to support Kyle, myself, and the entire Awesemo crew. So thank you guys if you've already done that. But as we start talking about some injuries and what to hit on the waiver wire, I think we need to start with Dak Prescott. Man, the most unfortunate injury situation, I think, in all of fantasy football this weekend and perhaps the entire season. We've really seen some star players go down. It's really unfortunate for the play. But, we have to talk about the ramifications for fantasy football. If you're a Dak Prescott owner, what are you doing? Maybe if you even just own a guy like CD Lamb, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, what does this mean for the Dallas Cowboys?
I mean, for the Dallas Cowboys, it's undoubtedly a downgrade. And I think they were in one of the better backup situations. Andy Dalton was a fringe starting level player. But, I'd put him in that range of between 25 to 32 in terms of starters. So having him as your backup, he's certainly one of the better backups, but he's obviously not Dak Prescott. My biggest concern would be that this team without their star quarterback leans on the run more, which would be quite concerning already, given that you'll have a downgrade in both efficiency and a downgrade now if that ends up being the case. in overall volume. So Amari Cooper, because of his market share numbers, probably insulated from any sort of downgrade in the offense, or at least saved by his market share numbers. Maybe it's a downgrade for him as well. But then you look at CeeDee Lamb, you look at Dalton Schultz, you look at Michael Gallup. I think they're going to be even more boom bust on a week-to-week basis, and their overall projection just has to be lowered. I think Zeke is probably fine from this. I could see them running more, but that's not a good thing for him because no Dak Prescott means less points on the board, less touchdown potential for Zeke. So I think he's the one who's safe from this. Amari Cooper, because of market share numbers, isn't perfectly safe, but he's still a starting level player. The rest of the guys, I am a bit concerned for.
I think so too. You and I were talking off air last week heading into the week 5 games. Just a guy like CeeDee Lamb, he had a 14.5% target share, something in that range, about 14.5%. Marquise Brown was around 26.5%, but CeeDee Lamb actually had more raw targets on the year. So not only was that team efficient, but everyone was seeing so much volume, partially because their defense was bad. Now with that efficiency sapped out of the offense, I think we could see a downgrade for all of these pass catchers. I think they'll still have to throw just because their defense has been so bad to start the year. And with Andy Dalton coming in, you have to project a little bit of a downgrade in efficiency. We'll see how this works. I'm a little bit worried, but that wasn't the only injury we saw. There wasn't anything quite as gruesome, but Dalvin Cook also left with what is believed to be a groin injury, and Alexander Madison looked really good in his absence. Are you prioritizing Alexander Madison on the waiver wire this week?
Yeah, I'm not sure how serious the Cook injury is. I believe he was walking around on the sidelines, ended up going to the locker room. I believe I saw bits and pieces of that game. So I'm not massively concerned for the long-term health of Cook. And typically, right away when an injury is, not even season ending, but multi-week. We saw that with Nick Chubb and with Kareem Hunt, with Austin Eckler.
Yeah.
Both of these guys, basically within hours of going down, we kind of knew the status that, there are multi-week injuries. I don't think we've gotten any update like that on Cook yet. So Madison's still the number one. If you can get 1 to 2 weeks of arguably RB1 production, like we saw last night, if he had found the end zone, it had been an absolute blow-up spot. And he still topped 100 yards, got, I believe, 22 touches. So you're probably getting RB1 production from him. It's just how long does that last? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 or 4? All those are in the range of outcomes. I would skew towards 1 to 2 weeks. So for me, Madison still the number one pickup. I don't see anyone else here really popping off. Maybe if you are in a position where you need receivers, and with the amount of injuries at all positions, there are certainly some teams that will need receivers. Some guys we'll talk about later are prioritized over Madison, especially because they could have some long-term value. But I would still say, blanket statement, if I have to choose one guy to add out the waiver wire, it's definitely Alexander Madison. Even if he only gives you 1 or 2 weeks of RB1 production, that's still RB1 production.
For sure. I think one thing we should be taking into consideration is prioritizing the starting weeks. It's kind of a mistake you and I made with Mike Davis, not probably giving as much credit to the Christian McCaffrey role that Mike Davis was walking into. Same thing with Madison. And this is also something you and I have talked about a lot. Alexander Madison's only 40% owned across these seasonal leagues. This number should be close to 100%. And it's because Alexander Madison is not just a handcuff. Similar to a Chase Edmonds type back, Alexander Madison has handled 10, 5, 8, and 7 touches. Those are in the Dalvin Cook healthy games. He's semi-flex usable. And when we start getting to bye weeks, COVID reschedulings, guys like Alexander Madison are going to become flex plays. He's not like a Tony Pollard where he's just sitting on your bench, couple carries a game. Madison does have somewhat deep flex appeal, in my opinion. So he is the number one waiver wire add, in my opinion. As we look through some more injury notes, this actually is an injury note and just a player performance note. Deontay Johnson, back injury. Chase Claypool. My goodness, Chase Claypool had the day of his life. How good is Pittsburgh at drafting wide receivers? They just continually find these nuggets in the later rounds. But where are you looking at for Chase Claypool on the waiver wire?
Yeah, I think in terms of I think running backs should be generally prioritized off the waiver because receiver production can be so fluky week to week. But in terms of long-term value, Claypool is the reason that I was hesitant to really go out on a limb and say Madison is the best overall ad. Claypool is an absolute fiend. And the only concern is he didn't get a ton of red zone looks, and he hasn't all season. But that's specifically because all the times he scores, he does it from outside of the 20. He is a guy who's just been massively making plays for Pittsburgh. I know, and I think it was week 1, he maybe led all rookie receivers and PFF grade at least, maybe also receiving yards because he had a long play there, more long plays in this game. The Philly defense was terrible at covering him, but he looked the part. He scored 3 times, 1 on a jet sweep. They were scheming him open in different ways. And when he wasn't schemed open, he just got open because he's so big. He's 6'4", 230 and runs a 4.42. He's big, thick Martavis Bryant, and he's going to play that role for this team. And he could just be the number one receiver because Juju has been just bad. It's just not been there for Juju. And maybe his lot in fantasy life is just to be the second or third fiddle to better receivers. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it helps that Deontay Johnson could be out. But honestly, I think if Johnson is out, you kind of have to look to Claypool as his team's number one receiver. It's a team that can throw touchdowns. They can throw a ton of yards with Ben Roethlisberger. If you're going to be the number one receiver, I think Claypool, for me, maybe is the number one ad because of his long-term value. Madison definitely gets the edge in next week and potentially the week after that production. But if I'm looking for a guy who could potentially be giving me points in weeks 10, 11, 12 as we get into the playoffs, Claypool is probably that guy more so than any other player you can find on the waiver wire this week.
I like Claypool. I think you mentioned the concerns. Not knowing exactly what Juju is at this point. Obviously, we have the one season of immense production from Juju, and he hasn't really done anything since last year. A lot of that was injury related. This year, there's no excuse. Having Deontay Johnson on the bench due to injury certainly has benefited Claypool, and we'll have to wait and see what the status is on Deontay Johnson given that back injury. That's why I'm a little bit lower on Chase Claypool than you, but still, 11 targets last week was absolutely monstrous. Love to see that from Chase Claypool. Another player we saw absolutely break out of nowhere was Travis Fulgham for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this was another game, just immense production. First of all, who is this guy? I mean, he wasn't on a lot of radars heading into the week, even the year. And how high are you on him on the waiver wire?
Yeah, so I believe he's an Old Dominion product. They had a few decent offenses throughout the years, and he was on one of them, I would imagine. Not awfully athletic, but I was watching him play. I watched this game for Roto World, and he looked good. He was decisive out of his breaks. He just looked like an NFL wide receiver after jumping around to a handful of teams. I believe he was both with maybe the Lions, who drafted him, and then the Packers at some point or something like that. He was a guy who never really found a home, and it would make sense that the time he blows up is on a team that is without, their top four or four of their top five, I guess you'd say, receivers. Although Zach Ertz is terrible, man. He just doesn't have it anymore, so maybe they're without all four of their top receivers with Rieger, Alshon, Deshaun, and Dallas all out. Travis Fulgham could just be the number one receiver. We talked about Greg Ward potentially adding some PPR value behind Zach Ertz. Travis Fulgham could just be the guy ahead of Zach Ertz because of the way he's played. If he's going to see anywhere close to these kind of target share or target totals, I believe he had 13 targets converted to 152 yards and a touchdown. Travis Fulgham is sort of what we wanted Greg Ward to be, a guy who just, they have to pass to somebody and they have nobody, except he's actually good. Greg Ward isn't good and he was getting targets. Travis Fulgham is good and he is eating Greg Ward's lunch. So I think Travis Fulgham falls into that Claypool tier of maybe not the most immediate production, but long-term upside. My only concern is that they do have a lot of guys who are slated to come back at some point. Dallas Goedert will come back, although he doesn't play receiver, does soak up targets. Jalen Rieger long-term should come back, but who knows? Alshon and Deshaun could both come back as early as next week. Now, do I think he's better than Alshon Jeffrey and probably has at least more value given that Deshaun is always hurt than Deshaun Jackson? I think he has more value than both of these guys. Yes. Am I confident that that means he plays over them? No. Coaches make seemingly bad decisions all the time. So he's sort of like Claypool in that tier, but I feel much less certain in my projection of him. I would still rank him as probably the number 3 ad off the waiver wire. I don't think there's anyone else that really comes close.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. You laid out the concerns very well. There will be a lot of players returning from injury to Philadelphia, so we're just not sure how the situation shakes out. As it stands right now, Travis Fulgham is available in 97% of leagues. A guy like Chase Claypool, he's only owned in 16. So these guys are readily available. You can certainly get them in most of your leagues already. A few other just news and notes before we move on. DJ Chark went down with an ankle injury. I think Laviska Shenault falls into a similar situation as a guy like Claypool, who is dealing with injuries in front of him, even Fulgham to some extent. But Laviska led the team in receiving this week. Somewhat noteworthy, they'll still use him out of the backfield. So I'm interested in a flyer on Shenault. I think I still prefer those two before Shenault, but it's close. And my last question is, can we just drop AJ Green at this point?
Oh, absolutely. He's dealing with ankle or hamstring injury, something like that. But honestly, I don't think the dude even cares to play for the Bengals anymore. There was one interception that Joe Burrow threw, kind of lofted it up. I'm not sure if he was hit on it, whatever. Throws a bad throw. AJ Green was in the vicinity and just gave up. I don't think he wants to play for the Bengals or maybe at all anymore. And the Bengals don't want to use him anymore because T. Higgins getting work over him. Obviously, Tyler Boyd is. Yeah, you can just drop AJ Green. He's just an old dusty receiver who might not even want to play. No reason to hang on to him.
Yeah, I think so too. If you can try to trade him, I would maybe off name value alone try to see what you can get.
Otherwise, can you get Travis Fulgham? I would take Travis Fulgham over him.
Yeah. So if you could get someone like that.
Yeah, all these guys.
Otherwise, you're right. I mean, Fulgham is available in 97% of leagues, so just dropping him straight up for AJ Green could make some sense as well. Now, as we start getting into our position by position breakdown, we'll be talking a lot of streamers, a lot of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends that are available on your waiver wire, and we'll try to work in some situational, who might we want to drop for these guys as well. With the quarterback position, there's actually, I think for the first time, not as many quarterbacks that I'm as interested in on the waiver wire. We are using a 50% owned threshold here. And our first guy I want to talk about is Justin Herbert. He's technically not available in 50% of leagues. He's owned 51% of the time, but I just want to throw this out there. If you can get Justin Herbert right now, he plays tonight, just please pick up Justin Herbert. I think far and away out of everyone on the waiver wire, he is the number one pickup. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine after tonight, he's a guy who's been used primarily as a streamer, like actually almost 100% as a streamer because he didn't start week 1 and he wasn't projected to start week 2 either. So it could be that after tonight, that if you have the roster spot, someone will cut him, especially if he doesn't have a blow up game, even if he just has, 300 yards and a score. If he doesn't have a blow up game, some teams it will make sense they have to cut him because he is not going to start for them. If you have the roster space, that back end roster space to get him on, despite holding him through a bye week, he will probably dip below 51% as long as he doesn't blow up. People won't care to hold on to him, and I get that. But he is easily the most upside out of all quarterbacks below 50%, 51%, but he could dip below that. I would say if he's available, absolutely add him now. And if he gets cut, if you have the bandwidth to hold him, absolutely pick him up and hold him through his bye week.
I think so too. As we get to more of the streamer categories for this upcoming week, a couple of names on the waiver wire that we probably weren't talking a lot about. Just going down the ownership, we have Daniel Jones. He's only owned in 34% of leagues. Kirk Cousins in 32, Ryan Fitzpatrick 21. And then we start getting to some really deep players like Nick Foles 10% and Andy Dalton 3%. One player I want to isolate right away is Kirk Cousins. And this is mainly a matchup-based streaming option for this upcoming week where they will face Atlanta. And we've been talking about Atlanta all year and why we want to target them. But I think there's a lot to like about this Vikings team, even from an outside perspective. They do like to run the ball a lot, but they're running a decent amount of plays. While they were 32nd in plays per game, they were 16th in seconds per play, so they were just lacking in efficiency. And then we saw it last night. That efficiency started to click a little bit. Kirk Cousins attempted 39 passes. Of course, that was against Seattle, and those games tend to shoot out. Luckily, Atlanta's do as well. So I'm very interested in Kirk Cousins as a streamer, and now teams will be looking to replace Dak. Baker Mayfield has a rib injury. There's also just players like Carson Wentz who have downright disappointed. Where is Kirk Cousins for you on the list of quarterback streamers in week 6?
Yeah, you talked about it. We don't have a ton of great options. He's owned in less leagues than Daniel Jones. The way Daniel Jones has played, if it doesn't happen against, the best matchup, if he doesn't absolutely blow up against Dallas, I just don't want him. Maybe you could argue that game environment wasn't perfect for him, but I'm just completely out on Daniel Jones. Just doesn't look like an NFL caliber quarterback. So I'll take Kirk Cousins, especially in the great matchup. Outside of that, I think Andy Dalton's maybe worth a shot because one of the reasons, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons we saw Dak Prescott pass so much is that their defense couldn't stop a single soul. So I think maybe Andy Dalton in a great system in terms of passing a lot, going to have some of the best, if not the best set of weapons around him. I'd probably take him over Nick Foles. Think you could argue him over Daniel Jones. I'll still take Kirk Cousins for the points now, though.
Yeah, I agree. It's honestly Kirk Cousins 1, and then I think it's Andy Dalton 2. I think you're on it. Number 3 for me might be a little surprising to you, but I think it should be Nick Foles at this point. Ryan Fitzpatrick, we just saw him beat up on it. Man, San Francisco's defense is so hurt, and like their 4th, 5th, and 6th corners were playing. Like all 4 of their top corners were out last week. So I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick, against a normal opponent, does he offer you the same kind of upside? I seriously question that, and I question Daniel Jones' talent outright. Nick Foles, we've at least seen him do it. The Bears are running a lot of plays as well. Nick Foles attempted 42 passes last week. He's not going to be efficient, but they draw Carolina this week, and Nick Foles is just 10% owned across seasonal leagues. He'd be my number 3. Where does he fall for you?
Yeah, he'd probably be my number 3 as well. It's probably like a handful of tiers. If we've got Kirk Cousins at the top, then probably a bit of a break. Wouldn't go too crazy on Andy Dalton. We just don't know what we're going to get. And then I'd go to Nick Foles. But I guess maybe you could even group him in with Dalton. I think both those guys fall behind Cousins, and if Herbert's available, fall behind Herbert. I wouldn't go crazy on them. I don't think, if you're playing in a free agent acquisition budget league, a fab league, you don't have to shoot all of your money on either of these guys. No strong preferences, but yeah, Foles does come in at number 3 for me.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. You don't want to break the bank for any of these players. I think that's pretty good for quarterback. Again, we'll qualify all of this with if Justin Herbert's available and you don't need a starter immediately this week, of course, because the Chargers play tonight and they'll be on bye in week 6. Try to stash him if you can. If you have a locked-in starter, look at Herbert. A lot of long-term upside there. But let's move over to the running back position, and let's spend some time here. This is the most important position for fantasy football, and it's a position with a ton of injuries so far. Not just McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, but now Dalvin Cook. There's a number of other players injured as well. We talked about Madison being the number 1 waiver pickup, not just among running back, but potentially among all fantasy leagues. And I do agree with that because of the standalone value he holds. Who would be a guy you look to behind Madison?
So we have a few guys. You could throw out Dearness Johnson. You could throw out potentially Malcolm Brown. We don't know. It's that backfield every single week just changes. I would lean Rex Burkhead. I don't have any strong leans after Madison because so many guys figured to play sort of a Chase Edmonds or a pre-injury Alexander Madison style role where they get carries or targets where you say, man, if I'm in a pinch, if I lost CMC and I lost I don't know, maybe you got Nick Chubb or Austin Eckler. If you lost some of these guys, you're getting down to your Chase Edmonds. You're getting down to like J.D. McKissick, who we don't even have on the list, but gets a handful of targets. I think Rex Burkhead is probably the best of those guys. Having a running quarterback once Cam Newton returns, and he could return versus Denver, having a running quarterback typically helps these between the tackles player, freezes linebackers, and gives them open lanes. The team has scored a lot of points. That does give him some touchdown potential. And although we saw Damian Harris break out last week, Rex Burkhead still notched 11 carries to Harris's 17. And I think that is typically the approach that we're going to see New England take, is play good defense, run the ball a lot, and throw efficiently, but not incredibly often with Cam Newton. So I think Rex Burkhead just fills that role of gets enough volume that he'll do in a pinch. And should anything happen to Harris, he does figure to be, or James White even, does figure to take on a pretty large role. So Rex Burkhead for me, I think he's probably my guy. Yeah, I'm not as interested in Dearness Johnson. I can't find myself ever playing a Rams guy like Malcolm Brown. I just don't know what they're doing. It's so insane, after Darrell Henderson killed everyone to come back and do what he did. It's quite frustrating. So I think Rex Burkhead has the steadiest floor. Ceiling certainly leaves something to be desired, but there's outside of Madison, it's not a great week for running back off the wire.
No, I think you should be looking ahead if possible, trying to get ahead of some of these situations. And it's something we've been recommending with Madison for weeks. And again, it's not just picking up handcuffs. Like, pick up handcuffs that are seeing a few carries because you might need to use them at some point. We've been talking about this with Edmonds, who is now above our 50% threshold. We've been talking about it with Madison, who's at 40% available in 60% of leagues. Should have been close to 100% owned, I would argue. But one guy for me in the number 2, I think, is Justin Jackson. And we've been talking a lot about when guys are on Monday Night Football and Tuesday Night Football in this instance, and you can pick them up, just do so. You have no idea what's going to happen in front of them. With Justin Jackson, he's going to be part of a committee with the other Los Angeles back, Joshua Kelly. Now, Joshua Kelly, the rookie, he's actually seen a fair amount of work so far in this backfield. But even last week, Justin Jackson played just shy of 50% of the snaps. He was in on 29% of the run plays, saw 6 carries and 2 targets. LA has been a committee the entire year. Eckler has slowly worked his way to the top of that committee, but they do use 2 backs, and they're running at such a high rate where we get 2 backs that are often usable. I think Justin Jackson, if you need an immediate play right now, he could fit the bill. Now, this team is on bye next week. We are not 100% sure the length of Eckler's injury. I know it's going to be at least a few weeks. I don't think Justin Jackson's going to be like the bell cow you ride through the playoffs or anything, but I think if you need a few extra weeks now, we could look at him. What do you make of Justin Jackson?
Yeah, you said it. They've been committed to a committee per se. Not only funny how that works out. Not only committed to this committee with Austin Eckler, but they did it with Melvin Gordon, with multiple backs spelling him. They did it with Melvin Gordon versus Danny Woodhead. They did it with Melvin Gordon versus Austin Eckler. And then they did it with Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson himself in the handful of games that we saw Melvin Gordon holding out. I think this is so ingrained in what they do that they want to have backs who specialize in certain things, and they want to get their guys like not 30 carries a game or 30 touches a game. That makes sense. I think in the modern state of the NFL, that makes sense that you want to have specialized players performing at their best. Justin Jackson has been efficient on the limited times he's been called upon. I think he's one of the better ads only if you can afford to not, like, assuming you're not playing him tonight because most games have wrapped up, although maybe you're holding out hope on some Bills players and he gives you a little bit of insurance there. So assuming that you can handle having a bye week player just sitting on your bench, I do think he's probably the most upside outside of Alexander Madison for immediate production after his bye week.
Yeah, I think so too. And we touched on this not being a great week for immediate production on the waiver wire. I still think we need to be taking a long-term approach to looking at backs that might emerge in favorable situations, just because, again, we're trying to win weeks. Like, I don't want to put a guy like Frank Gore on my bench who is seeing 10 to 12 touches a game and a Jets offense. I'm just not interested in that, because even if I do need to play Frank Gore, I'm not winning that week, or at least I'm not winning that position. I might win in spite of him, but he's not going to be the reason I do it. So taking a look at some of these handcuffs in deeper bench leagues, I think does make some sense. Even a guy like Tony Pollard, just because he's in that offense behind Zeke that runs so much. As we've seen, they're willing to throw the ball to the running back quite a bit too. So Tony Pollard's the name I would mention here. Brian Hill, of course, he's been working his way into a bit of a timeshare with Todd Gurley, so maybe he offers you some usable weeks. Any of the Chiefs backups, particularly Darrell Williams, Giovanni Bernard behind Joe Mixon, these are all names I would at least file away, put them way down your waiver wire list. And if you have the space, maybe take a flyer, hold them just in case. Anyone in that category that stands out to you?
Yeah, no, I think you named them all. I think maybe the Chiefs backfield, especially Clyde Edwards-Helaire, just playing meh. But yeah, it's only really if you have a deep roster or you can just afford to hold guys who you're not starting. Like Darrell Williams, I think Darrington Evans, Gio, all don't fit the bill of getting enough touches to be fantasy viable. They're just, interesting handcuffs.
Yeah, I agree. Well, with that, before we move over to the wide receiver position, I want to talk to you guys about the Express Pass that we have over at Awesemo.com. We've added some great tools to our NFL Express Pass users. For only $3.95, you can purchase an NFL Weekly Express Pass, which now includes everything you need for NFL Showdown single game contest formats. You can now access Awesemo Showdown, single game player projections, ownership projections, and top plays tool when you purchase this pass, in addition to player rankings, lineup builder lite, ownership rankings, and the Top Stacks Express tool. It is our best offering ever for an Express Pass, so head over to awesemo.com/join today to purchase your $3.95 NFL Express Pass. Of course, we are walking into more and more Showdown content that we didn't even expect to have. So this NFL Express Pass, you guys might be getting more use out of it than you ever thought, just because of these island games that are popping up out of nowhere. But let's go over to probably the most interesting position of the week, wide receiver. Again, we talked about Claypool. We talked about Fulgham. A lot of these guys were popping off in week 5. Not only that, a couple wide receivers that had been playing roles in the offense finally emerged for big weeks. Brandon Cooks finally put it together. Henry Ruggs emerges from the injury, only catches 2 passes, but they both happen to be like 60-plus yards downfield, and he scores the touchdown. I believe Ruggs only had 3 targets, but he had those 2 catches over 100 yards in the score. So if you played him, the box score looked really nice for Ruggs. We also have a guy like Mecole Hardman potentially working his way into a larger role. Sammy Watkins went down with a hamstring injury in that game. I guess we talked a lot about Claypool. We talked a lot about Fulgham. Behind those two, anyone you're looking at in particular, anyone stand out?
Yeah, so I think Ruggs might be sort of the trap because he does come on the bye, and maybe that keeps people off of him, but he does come up on his bye this week. And like you said, 3 targets. He really, I don't want to say he was lucky because he's so fast, he can get open at will. And, Derek Carr, for all his faults, was hitting him with, reasonable degree of accuracy. He has a lot of upside on a per target basis. 3 targets isn't enough. So I think he might be sort of the trap. I'd rather look to both Laviska Shenault and Brandon Cooks, just number 2 receivers, or Shenault potentially being a number 1 receiver on offenses that they play with a terrible defense backing them. So they're always going to be giving up points. That sets up for great game environments. And because they're projected to be losing a lot, they're going to be passing a lot. So for me, Shenault and Cooks, I still think I'd probably consider definitely taking Chase Claypool over these guys. I think Claypool is just my favorite ad. I think he has probably the most long-term upside. And then Travis Fulgham falls somewhere in that tier too. Brandon Cooks, as much as dropped me a 0 in cash games a few weeks ago. If he's going to be on the field for every single snap with Deshaun Watson, he really should be rostered in all leagues.
Yeah, I agree. And they played an extremely difficult slate of games to start the year. We finally see that schedule loosen up, and Brandon Cooks has himself a game. Brandon Cooks has always been the type of receiver, just given his speed and his down through ability, where he's going to give you some of those duds. He's also going to give you some monstrous games like we saw last week. So I do like Cooks. He would be third, fourth, maybe even fifth on the waiver wire for me. Again, it's Ruggs, Cooks. And then I agree with you that Laviska Shenault is someone we should look at. Again, DJ Chark went down with an injury, and we're not sure the severity of it. But Laviska Shenault had already been working his way into the offense. This past week, he ends up leading the team in receiving, and this is a Jacksonville team we project to be trailing a lot. With Laviska, too, you're also getting those bonus carries. It's sort of like the Deebo Samuel effect we saw last year, and we like that. I mean, it's not anything that you're going to rely on, but anytime a guy's going to mix in a couple extra carries here and there, I think it's worthwhile. One other guy I want to throw into this that we seem to have forgotten a little bit about because of the bye week is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Again, Devontae Adams will be back, so Marquez Valdes-Scantling will not be in the wide receiver one role. But we've seen Alan Lazard have productive weeks, even with Devontae Adams on the field. I'm interested in Marquez Valdes-Scantling in a highly efficient Green Bay offense. Any interest for you?
Yeah, I think maybe it's the bye week, whatever. He should be owned in essentially every week, every league. If he's going to be the number 2 receiver for Aaron Rodgers on an absolute heater, absolutely. I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a guy not only who should be owned in every league. Out of all these guys, I feel like he has one of the higher weekly floors just in terms of targets and air yards. He does run deeper down the field, so maybe that gives him, on a per target basis, some bust potential. But on the overall volume and just the median projection, I think Valdes-Scantling is probably, I didn't realize how low owned he was. Maybe he is potentially the best ad. I love Claypool, but he's probably 1 or 2 with Claypool for me.
Yeah, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he is available in just under 70% of leagues. He's only 34% owned right now across seasonal leagues. Another guy I think we should touch on a little bit deeper is Mecole Hardman. He has the same available ownership as a guy like Russell Gage. He's in the same category as Ruggs and Cooks. Mecole Hardman only available in 40% of seasonal leagues right now. Again, Sammy Watkins got hurt. Hamstring injury, soft tissue injuries have long plagued Sammy Watkins. Where is Mecole Hardman for you?
A bit more speculative. I'm not sure we can be confident that he actually runs ahead of Demarcus Robinson, or at least doesn't split that role to an extent where he is just a touchdown or bust play. So I think he falls, let's call him 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that range, where if you have a deep roster, you can roster him. Still don't feel comfortable starting him yet. Even if Sammy Watkins does miss time, I'm not sure Demarcus Robinson doesn't play over him. So that makes it difficult for me to really feel great about adding him over other plays this week.
Yeah, I think we're slowly seeing Mecole separate himself. But again, there's not this clear delineation or anything like that. It could flip back and forth like it did towards the tail end of last year. What I will say about the situation is if you have a team that's a contender, maybe you take a shot on a Mecole Hardman over a guy like Fulgham. I would say Fulgham has the better role immediately, but both of them have kind of speculative roles moving forward just with the injury situation in Philly and players coming back from injury. And Mecole Hardman's playing with Pat Mahomes. I mean, you're taking a flyer on the lottery ticket of all lottery tickets with a Pat Mahomes receiver and Mecole Hardman. So I think that's worth a look. Outside of that, any speculative ads you might look just for future production. We have players like N'Keal Harry on the list, the wide receiver 2 in New England. Olamide Zaccheaus is really busted for everyone, and Julio should be back at some point. I think he's no longer an ad. Rieger, someone that I've been trying to harp on people to stash if they can, but it seems like the nature of the NFL this year isn't going to allow many people to do so. Anyone deep you'd look at?
Yeah, I think probably maybe you could look at Jameer Byrd. Last time we saw him, he saw 10 targets, but wasn't awfully efficient on them. I do think there are just enough good ads under 50% owned, Cooks, Ruggs, Gage, even Hardman, Scantling, all these guys, Shenault, Claypool, Fulgham, that if you're getting down to, Jeff Smith, Jalen Rieger, I think there are probably just better plays you have passed up on.
I agree. Again, if we look down the wide receiver totem pole, we have Brandon Cooks. He's only owned in 44% of leagues. Ruggs, 44%. Russell Gage, even 41. Mecole Hardman, 40. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 34. And then, of course, we get down to guys like Claypool, 16, and Fulgham, only 3% owned. So with that, let's move over to the tight end position. This is a position that's been really tough on the waiver wire this year. And we have had some injuries, including Dallas Goedert, but just a lot of overall inefficient play. When I start to look down this list, Goddard is available in 44% of leagues. Most of that is because of the injury. Jimmy Graham is at 40%. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about Jimmy Graham. He seems a little bit touchdown dependent for me. Greg Olsen has ebbed and flowed a lot for Seattle as well. Only 1 target last night. Then there's Logan Thomas, widely targeted, extremely inefficient. Any tight ends you're willing to take a shot on?
Yeah, I actually think Jimmy Graham's probably a fine play, averaging 6.7 targets per game under Nick Foles. And even before that, he was getting targeted, was it 4 times a game, has scored 3 times. And although you don't expect that to keep up, 3 times under Nick Foles, I don't expect that touchdown per game pace to keep up. He is getting some looks in the red zone. I think he's clearly the number one ad because he's had a consistent role, even if it does come from the Bears. Nick Foles hasn't been god-awful. He's targeted Jimmy Graham. He's scored. So tight end's quite terrible this week. Jimmy Graham, to me, is the clear number one. Greg Olsen, like you said, like one target. If that's your floor, it is quite difficult. Maybe if you really just want to shoot for the moon, you look for some touchdown upside. Jordan Aikens owned less than 10%. He was inactive last week due to concussion. I would assume, concussions are generally 1 to 2 weeks. Comes back and does continue to play the receiving tight end role. Frankly, it's Jordan Aikens if he's healthy, or Darren Fells because he did score, and he'll probably just consume Aikens' role when he's not there. So it's one of the Houston tight ends, and it's Jimmy Graham, and that's about it. I hope you have your tight end set because this is not the week to find one.
I agree with you. Actually, it's the same order for me. I prefer Jimmy Graham slightly over Jordan Aikens. And then after that, probably Logan Thomas based on target volume alone and the quarterback change. Maybe that's a positive for them, but I can't really spin it in any direction other than that. It's just a really risky situation for all of these tight ends. So I think we just leave this at Jimmy Graham, Jordan Aikens, and maybe Logan Thomas if you need to get real deep on the wire. As far as defense goes, last week we saw a lot of our potential streaming defenses in tough matchups. I think this is a far better week for streaming defenses. What do you think? I think there's a lot of options.
Yeah, there are a lot of defenses that are rosterable right now, under 50% owned for many of them, under 10% owned, that just get great matchups. So I would say this week more than others, just be looking to play good matchups, because last week a lot of the good matchups were already held by defenses that most people owned, and this is not the case this week. I'll point out a few of them. Washington and their incredible front seven, first round picks across the board. They got Chase Young back, faces the Giants, who just couldn't even, I know they put up points, but Daniel Jones, I don't even think he scored in his game because Evan Ingram had a rushing touchdown inexplicably. So I love anytime you can face Daniel Jones and the Giants. And when you have an incredible front seven, and that's kind of Daniel Jones's weakness, is that he doesn't know when pressure is coming. I think Washington at 7% owned is a great play versus the Giants.
I think so too. I think that has to be one of the top plays on the board. We also get the Chargers taking on the New York Jets, and it's kind of been rinse, repeat, play whoever's playing against Sam Darnold and the Jets, or in this case, Joe Flacco maybe is even playing. And again, the Chargers are only owned in 38% of leagues. Like you mentioned, the Washington football team only owned in 7% of leagues. So this team is available in 93% of leagues. Anyone can go and pick this team up. Some other matchups I would just highlight quickly. We have Miami taking on Denver, 2% owned for the Dolphins. We have Carolina taking on Chicago, and that's probably a middling matchup, but Chicago, again, is dropping back a ton, a lot of pass attempts there, and I think they will be trailing Carolina in the spot. 2% owned for the Panthers, Detroit, Jacksonville, 1% owned, and of course, the Vikings are taking on Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons that just changed coaches, 30% owned if you want to take a shot there. As far as some sneaky look-ahead spots, maybe if this is a tiebreaker for some of your streaming options, we do get a lot of guys that we talked about today in games with high totals, particularly this Steelers team. I mean, if you want to look at Chase Claypool, they take on the Browns, that total sitting at 51. If you want to look at a guy like Laviska Shenault, the Jaguars are taking on the Lions. That total's at 54. Who is in a good spot on the waiver wire for an immediate start this week?
Yeah, it's the receivers that we talked about. It's Marquez Valdes-Scantling versus the Bucs, 54 total. It's Laviska versus the Lions, 54 total. And Chase Claypool, these are guys who not only maybe you have to boost them even higher, because I said we don't know. It's only 1 week of production from everyone outside of Scantling. It's only 1 week of production from Viska as operating as the number one receiver. It's only 1 week for Claypool. But man, they come back with strong matchups again. So maybe you just continue to push these guys up. If you don't need running back production, if you went running back early and dodged the injuries, just keep jamming in receivers off the waiver wire with Viska and with Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really nice to see these guys in some usable matchups right away. Kind of to sum this up before we get out of here. Again, I think some of the top waiver ads of the week are going to be Claypool, Fulgham, and particularly Alexander Madison. Anyone else you would really highlight before we get out of here? I think we hit on most of it.
No, we definitely hit on most of it. I would prioritize the breakout receivers because their breakouts do look to have some staying power. And unfortunately, Brandon Cooks probably also gets prioritized. Then at running back, it's Alexander Madison or bust for me.
All right, guys. Thank you again to our title sponsor, Yahoo. I am Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. He is Kyle Dvorchak at Kyle Tweets here. Make sure to check out our podcast network. You can find all these videos on playback there if you ever miss them on YouTube. Otherwise, we will see you again next week for another Waiver Wire show. Have a good one and good luck, guys.